this is the panel about me. So, thank you guys for coming. I am adding my wife Emily to the panel using guest of honor powers. No, I'm just kidding. She is maybe going to ask some questions of us. I put her on the spot and said, ask us some questions, but I'm very capable of asking myself questions. We also have Michael Whalen on the panel. We just like being on panels together. So, some of the questions we might just, Michael has been working with me for a number of years now, but before that, of course, I was just a Michael Whalen fan. In fact, the way that I got a Michael Whalen cover was when my very first book was sold to Tor. They said, who would you like to do the cover? Which I thought was very nice. Normally, publishers don't pay any attention to you, and I said, Michael Whalen. And they said, well, Michael's really busy. Really busy, and everybody asked for Michael Whalen, so maybe one of these other artists who are fantastic, and I got a really good cover on that, and things, but years later, I had this plan. And what had happened is I waited until the first of my Wheel of Time books came out, and didn't flop. Right? This was my bar, my threshold for success. As long as I didn't crash the series, I knew I was going to be okay. And it came out, and it did really well. Each Wheel of Time book had done, if I'm right, Tom, each Wheel of Time book did better than the one before it, all the way through the Wheel of Time's career. And I didn't interrupt that. In fact, Gathering Storm did better than the one before, not because of me, but because Wheel of Time fans are awesome. And so, everyone was super excited at Tor, and they're like, yay! The series is, it's not a disaster! Brandon didn't ruin it, and they're all just very, very happy with me, and at that time, I went in and I pitched The Way of Kings to Tom, who's sitting right back there. Tom Doherty, who's the CEO, publisher at Tor, and I had this big presentation with concept art and all kinds of stuff. This story's way out of order, sorry. But it was a really nifty thing like authors didn't normally do for Tom. And he's like, Brandon, I'm going to buy your next book. Why have you done this extensive Hollywood-style, pitch on it? And I said, well, I want a Michael Whalen cover. And I know Michael is hard to get. And so he said, well, Michael owes me a favor. I'll call him and see what he says. And Michael thankfully said yes to that. Some of the questions we might ask Michael's direction for when he was starting out to kind of get an artist perspective.
Well, I want to just add to your story. The way Tom got me to say yes is that he was co-guest of honor, or publisher guest of honor at, I believe, in Boskone, and we were at the banquet together, and he was sitting next to me. And he said, Michael, you promised me a cover for a year upon year, and I keep asking you, and you haven't come through. And he grabbed my arm and said, I'm not letting go until you give me a delivery date. And my response was, Tom, if you give me a science fiction book, I'd love to do it, because I really feel like I've been typecast as just a fantasy artist over the last 10 years. And I waited, and I got this huge manuscript in the mail. And The Way of Kings, and it's this fantasy story. And Audrey could tell you the groan that came out of my studio when I opened it up. But I got 20 pages into the book, and I was absolutely lost in the story. And, I approached the whole assignment with such enthusiasm and such excitement that I can't express it. It just felt great. And I felt like the old enthusiasm I had when I was younger and working as an illustrator on a regular basis had just revisited me, and it was a great feeling. So anyway, that's all.
It is a very science-fictional fantasy, as fantasies go. It has the only
we got kind of close, except didn't. But yeah. But we should introduce the rest of the people on the panel. We have Joshua Gomez, my agent. Yes, and we have Moshe Fader, my editor. So I kind of started with Michael. Maybe I should explain how I met these folks, and then we can kind of maybe take some questions from Emily or from the audience or things like this. So the first of these folks that I met on this panel was Joshua. I met Joshua at the Nebula Awards. It would have been like 2000 or something. And what happened is I was taking a class at the time from a fantasy novelist, David Farland. He was teaching a class that I now teach at the university. And I'm taking this class, and he's talking about being a professional in the field. And I had written 6 novels at that point. I was quite enthusiastic about the writing, but I knew nothing about the industry. Right? I was in that stage where a lot of authors are, I don't know if you guys have been there, where you just kind of sometimes go to a con and meet someone who says, yeah, I'm a publisher, and so you just send them a book, and then someone comes to you and says, you know, when they say I'm a publisher, they mean, I would one day like to publish books, you know, like that level. I wasn't doing any research, I was just kind of whatever, and Dave's class really focused my attention and said, no, you need to learn to network, to be a part of the community and all these things, particularly when I went up to him and said, Dave, I've written 6 novels, what do I do? He's like, 6 novels? Okay, what you're going to do is you're going to go to the Nebula Awards. I'm like, why? He said, well, they're in New York this year, a lot of agents and editors will attend, it'll give you a good chance to practice pitching. Which was somewhat nerve-wracking to me. I said, what do I do? He's like, well, just go hang out in the bar, they'll all be there. I'm a Mormon kid, I don't really know how to hang out in bars. He's like, yeah, order a Sprite, you'll be fine. So, I went to the Nebula Awards that year with my friends. I stayed at a friend's house. It was in New York. I'd never been to Manhattan before. It was a great, very authentic Manhattan experience. My umbrella got stolen. But I went to the con hotel where, you know, the Nebula Awards back then weren't really a con. It was just like everyone got together and had drinks, and then there was a soiree, and then you went up and had a fancy dinner, except I couldn't afford the fancy dinner. So they set some seats out for a couple of us who couldn't afford the fancy dinner to just sit and watch the awards. There were like 5 of us who were off to the side while everyone had a fancy dinner. But before that, I went into the bar, and I ordered a Sprite, and I sat there smiling. And I turned to the person next to me and said, hi! And started chatting with them just to get some experience. And I chatted with them for a while. And then they went off to do something, and the person on the other side of me leaned in and said, you know that's Jim Mintz, editor at Tor at the time. I'm like, no? Oh, no. But then I walked out of that, and my friend, who was also an aspiring writer, came running down the stairs and said, I met Simon Green's agent. And Simon Green was an author that I really enjoyed reading, both of us had, and so I walked upstairs and met Joshua in the kind of cramped confines that sometimes happen at these science fiction parties, right? Where you're like, oh, we're having a party! How is everybody? Joshua gave me his card, and it was very nice, and I proceeded to send him a book, which he rejected. And I proceeded to send him another book, which he rejected. And then I sent him a 3rd book, and he rejected that. But he rejected them in increasing order of niceness. Like, the first thing I sent him was a query, which he just rejected with a form letter. And the next thing I sent was a query that he asked for some chapters on, and I sent him those. He said, these are pretty decent. These are what's wrong with them. I'm not interested, but, you know, here's what's wrong. And then the next one I wrote him, he sent me a really long, this is what's wrong letter. And then I just kind of ignored it and said, well, can I send you something else?
Which Brandon didn't know if someone sent you this is what's wrong, maybe fix this?
Well, not necessarily. We're getting to that. But then I sent Joshua the next book, and then Joshua called me, and he said, when an agent asks for this extensive of revisions, what they mean is, try doing this in your fiction and fixing these types of things and asking to resubmit. It's not a promise to look at it again, but it is an indication that they don't want to promise to look at it again, but they really do kind of want to look at it again. It's what he actually told me that on the phone. So that was my experience with Joshua. He still rejected all my books. My experience with Moshe is, the other convention that Dave told me to go to is World Fantasy Con, which if you can only get to a couple of cons, you know, World Fantasy, World Con, and he mentioned the Nebula Awards when the pros decide to go, which usually means it's near New York because a lot of people are lazy. But he said, go to those and go to World Fantasy Convention, which if you're an aspiring pro is a really good con to go to because a high percentage of pros, very focused on professionalism. You know, all cons are fun. All of these are fun, but if you're specifically hunting pros, he said it's one of the best places to go if you're hunting agents and editors. So I started going to World Fantasy Convention. And at one of the World Fantasy Conventions in Montreal, we went to a person we'd met, my friends and I had met earlier, who ran a writing workshop. So she was an ex-editor, I think it was Jeannie Develops, who was not an editor herself, so she wasn't scared and threatened by us, because editors go to cons to kind of meet authors, but also if you get swarmed by a bunch of them, it can be a little threatening. And so we went to her and we said, all right, who should we hunt down? we literally said that. We're like, who do you think is acquiring new authors? She's like, oh, Moshe. Moshe is David Hartwell's assistant, and they just gave him permission to start acquiring his own list. He'd be a really good one to talk to because he's been trained by David, who is, was one of the great editors in the field. He knows his stuff. Plus, he's just starting to buy things. Has a really good eye. And we're like, all right, we're going to find this Moshe person. And we spent 3 days of that con reading every badge of every person who passed us, looking for this Moshe person. And finally, like at the last night of the con, we found him at a party. Actually, Dan Wells, my writing buddy who was there with me, found Moshe and started talking to him, and then he sent Peter, who's now my assistant, to come find me. So he wouldn't let go of Moshe, who might wander off. And Peter came and got me and said, we found him. And pulled me over, and then we talked to Moshe for like an hour and a half. About all the programs, how to be good aspiring writers. We didn't sit and pitch to him. We said, what are you working on that you're really excited by? Which allowed us to talk to him and let him talk a lot. And we found out what kind of things he liked. If he was working on Lee Modesett books at the time and telling us about them. Like, Lee likes really rule-based magic systems. He's got a science background. He's a really good match for me. If Moshe likes that, he might like my stuff. And so then we both sent him books, Dan and I did. Peter, our mutual friend, wanted to be an editor. That was our other way of talking to editors without being threatening. We'd walk up and say, our friend wants to be an editor. And to a person, they're like, oh, you poor, poor child. They put their arms around him, and they would just start talking to him about how terrible it is to be an editor. In this sort of, very paternal way or maternal way. And then they would look to us and say, so do you guys want to be editors too? And we'd say, no, we're aspiring authors. And then they were trapped in the conversation with us already. We actually called this petering people. And so then we had Moshe trapped, and he read Dan's book first because it was shorter. And then he actually rejected Dan's book. And then my book sat on his desk, and it was big, it was very large, and I had given up on it. And 18 months after I'd sent it to him, Moshe keeps saying, oh, every time I say this, it's not that long, was it, Brandon? Yes, it was that long.
Let me just interrupt
Yes.
here. Make an editorial comment. Okay, this was 2001 that the con was in
Yes.
Montreal.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been trying lately to try to track down my correspondence with him to actually confirm how long it took. And unfortunately, the earliest emails were done on the internal Tor system, so they're not on my computer at home. I did at one point copy them all onto a disk, so if I can find that disk, I may be able to pin this down. But it must have been a while because the book didn't come out until...
Well, I got the phone. I know the class I was in when I got the phone call. March 2013.
2013.
Wait,
No,
not
2003, 2003.
2000.
Yeah. That's a really fast
I was starting new legends that I kept waiting for a decade.
Yes.
And then you somehow use a time machine to publish all those books that came out in between. So, no, the thing was, it was a very big manuscript, and I really didn't like the opening terribly much. And I thought it had a lot of, it just had a flavor of, very earnest, amateurish.
That's not what you said when you called me.
And so I read a little bit, and I put it aside. And after a while, I felt guilty. And maybe it was a year later. I don't know. Some period later, I felt guilty. He was such a nice young man. They'd been very nice to me at the con. They really buttered me up tremendously and made me feel like I was this oracle of publishing, answering their questions and everything. So I thought, I really should try again. I didn't really read enough of it to be sure, even though I usually think I can tell within a few pages, because I go a lot by, the quality of the prose and stuff like that. But, so I read more, and the next section was better than the first section. And I read some more, and that section was better than the first two sections, and so on and so on. I could just see something was happening in the course of this book, like this author had reached some kind of, quantum point where he was going to leap up to the next level. And this was happening before my eyes as I was reading this book. And I just got increasingly involved in the story, and I quickly saw that it had a lot of really cool original ideas in it and everything too. And by the time I finished it, I thought, oh my gosh, I want to buy this book. And the thing is, so much time had passed that some of the contact information,
all of the contact information. This is my fault.
was no longer good. And I thought at that point that I could probably still use the mailing address, but I didn't want to make him wait to get a letter from me. I wanted to call him on the phone and tell him the great news that I was going to buy his book. And the phone number wasn't any good, but the lucky thing was that he mentioned being involved in the science fiction club at BYU, and I was able to go to the
That's how you found me.
I was able to look at the website and see he was still involved.
Oh, it was the Leading Edge, the magazine.
Yes, yes.
That's how you got my phone number.
So,
Okay.
well, then I realized, oh, maybe he's like a grad student now. So and then I checked the student directory and got your phone number at your location.
Okay.
That was how I called you. So, yeah. Thank God for the internet. It would have been much
Right, because my email address had changed. You did try that.
Yeah.
My first email was AOL. And you guys laugh, that was the way to get emails in the 90s. Yeah.
It still is.
Yeah.
It's a surprising number of people still on AOL.
Right. And
Prominent authors.
when you stopped paying for AOL, they yanked your email address, right?
Yeah.
You couldn't get a free AOL email address, at least back then. And so I had to eventually bite the bullet and stop paying $15 a month or whatever for dial-up AOL when we had DSL already. Or things like that, and I had to change all my email addresses over to a Gmail or something, and that meant, and they didn't offer any forward or anything. Like, you leave us, you're losing all of your old contacts. That was kind of how they kept control of you for a while. And so I had changed, and then I'd gotten a cell phone, and that was my first cell phone. The number on Moshe's thing was a house phone, right? You guys laugh about this sort of stuff, but that's what we had back then. A house phone. And so if you want to get a hold of someone, it's not always that easy. And I can still remember picking up this phone. It was a voicemail. That I'm like, I got this voicemail from Moshe. He's like, hi, my name's Moshe Fader. I'm not sure if this is the same Brandon Sanderson that sent me a manuscript a little while ago, but if it is, call me back. I want to buy your book.
So, editors love to do that. It doesn't make someone's day, And I have to say that the great thing about it from my point of view was, this was only the second book I had bought for Tor. The first one was a mainstream novel, a satirical novel about the Vietnam War, which was published actually on the Forge imprint on Tor. And so this was going to be my first science fiction or fantasy acquisition, and the good thing about it was there was so much about it that sounded so hooky, unusual and interesting, and stuff that we could promote and describe interestingly in copy. So when I'm pitching the book to Tom, to get permission to buy it, it really wasn't that hard, and he could immediately see what the appeal was going to be. So
right, it's almost like fantasy was ready for this sort of thing, because you'll notice if you go look right at that time that I broke in, we had a bunch of authors who started writing these very science fiction-y fantasy stories. I'm not the only one. Brent Twigs and Pat Rothfuss are two other examples. It's like the genre was like ready for it. What is the next? And I just happened to be a big fan who'd been reading fantasy for a long time, and my own instinct said, well, this is something that I should be writing that people aren't doing yet, that I want to read. And so, yeah.
Yeah, and since, I really think of myself as a science fiction person, even though I'm now typed as a fantasy editor because of him.
So that's two people who wanted science fiction.
Yeah. And the commercial reality, as most of you probably know, is that these days fantasy sells better. We have all of these huge best-selling fantasy series, of which Brandon's a great example, or Patrick Rothfuss or George R.R. Martin. They're all selling at levels that science fiction has almost never approached, and they're doing it book after book, which also never happens with science fiction.
Well, going by the headlines I've been reading in the last 3 months, fantasy's got a huge future, at least for the next 4 years. We all need to escape.
Yeah, so, and you know, it's only good to get more because this stuff is going to end up being, you know, movies or TVs as well, probably.
Well, let's hope good ones.
Yeah,
We can talk about that later.
So,
let's let Joshua tell us your first impressions and memories of the Brandon Sanderson thing.
Well, yeah, so, I mean, Brandon has exactly described how he and I first met. I have kept my copies of some of the initial letters I wrote to Brandon, because back then you really sent letters as much or more as you did emails, so we were cleaning out it's 7 years, you can clean out the files, and I actually have copies of the very polite rejection that I wrote Brandon.
I've got copies too. I found the first one that was just on the query, that was just like the form letter one. That one's particularly fun.
Now of course some of those emails would have just been, maybe, boop, gone to the, but, so the thing with me early on with Brandon was the fantasy genre is full of writers who have a series that they can write, and they keep writing it and writing it and writing it. And Brandon, even when I'm turning down the novels, the magic systems were different in all of them. And they were fresh and creative and very rule-based and interesting. And I'm like, anyone who can keep coming up with ideas like this in the fantasy genre is doing something that nobody else is doing, and I'm interested in that.
Right, and I will say the books he rejected were all books that didn't end up getting published.
Yeah.
He didn't reject the one that actually sold. And the way that it happened is once Moshe called me, I called Joshua immediately because he had called me to tell me, start revising your books and start fixing in new books these things I'm talking about. And I said, I have an offer. And he's like, well, I guess I better read that.
Or the promise of an offer,
Yeah.
because it was 6 months still till...
Well, that's how things go in the publishing industry.
Wheels turn...
It would have been much faster if you'd accepted the first offer.
Yes. So I had the agent to argue for more money.
So I'm not going to take on someone just because they have the promise of an author from a publishing company. I still want to be sure that I'm going to like the work and want to keep working with the author, because selling first novels isn't a very long-lasting or lucrative business for an agent. It's selling the second and the fifth and the 15th contract for the author, so I don't want to take something on just to get a few $100s. So the difference with the Landris was, it was the first book that had plotting problems, but that were not so intrinsically woven in that the book was like, well, it's interesting, but I don't know what to do with it. Elantris was something that I could go back to Brandon with specific suggestions, like cutting out deleted scene that
that's on the
appears in
website.
the 10th anniversary edition.
Yeah.
Go back with specific suggestions on fixing a novel, and then having something that I would, really love. And, that's pretty much what happened.
It is, and Joshua does put his proverbial or money where his mouth is, or the giving away money. Like, I have had friends who had books that had offers that were being published that Joshua read and said, this is a bad match for me. Another agent will do a better job with this. They understand the genre better. And those people have gone on to be very successful. And Joshua turned them down not because, he knew that was money, but he knew he wasn't the best agent for them, and it was been good for them that he did.
Yeah, a good agent, just like a good editor, knows, what he or she wants to work on, And you're spending so much time with these books and in the heads of the authors that you really want it to be somebody you enjoy working with and the work excites you. So a really good editor or a good agent will have no problem saying this is absolutely publishable, but I'm not the person who should be handling it. And if I say that to somebody in rejecting a book, they shouldn't take it as, oh, I'm just trying to palm them off with a polite excuse. It's actually the truth. Sometimes I'll even say, oh, so-and-so, my colleague might be a better person for this than I would be. But the other thing I want to say about Joshua is that he could have been an editor. He just wanted to make more money, so he became an agent.
Eventually that would.
But he has excellent editorial insight, and he has been very helpful to us at every stage, and with every book, he always makes very good suggestions.
But my job has diminished in that front quite a bit because Brandon is very keen, very sharp, and spent the early years of his career constantly saying, these are things that I need to be doing better, so I'm going to go and do them better. And, I kind of miss the good old days. But now, back when I got to roll up my sleeves at the Brandon manuscript, the Sanderson manuscript, and now, of course, there's a team of people behind every Brandon Sanderson manuscript, and Brandon has improved in so many ways that I read the books and go, oh, this one's good.
There was a book recently where Josh is like, there's a slow paragraph in this chapter. Then go edit that. Let's let Emily talk. Emily, can you tell them about...
Do I get to talk about how I first met you?
Yes.
So let's see, November of 2005. Elantris was published May of 2005. So I missed all of this early stuff, living in the friend's basement, making no money, writing 10 books. I missed all that, which, I'm not necessarily sorry about that.
She got in for the big money of my first contract, which was $10,000 for the book, yeah.
So Elantris came out May of 2005. We had a mutual friend who set us up on a blind date, and it was November of 2005. And both of us were, 29?
Yeah.
Which, being 29 and unmarried is not that big of a deal, but we're Mormons and live in Utah, where most people historically have gotten married much younger. And so people were always setting me up on blind dates and saying, oh, you're old, this guy's old. Luckily, this friend knew me a little better, and he found out that I had read The Eye of the World, and that I liked science fiction and fantasy. He's like, I've got a guy I've got to set you up with. And I was like, yeah, whatever, blind date. And then the same friend was talking to Brandon and says, I have a girl I want to set you up with. And Brandon said, I have a girlfriend. And he's like, yeah, but when you dump her, you'll really like
He didn't say dump, he said when it doesn't work out. I know the girl you should date.
This friend obviously liked me more than Brandon's then current girlfriend. But anyway, so the relationship didn't work out.
Not with us, but the other.
And we got set up on a blind date, and it was fun. This friend, I told, his name's Isaac. He actually is still a good friend of ours. And I told him, okay, if I'm going on a blind date, you're coming too. So I set him up with someone. That didn't work out. But we went to a play and went to dinner. And all during this date, Brandon was talking about my editor and my agent, and I'm an author. And I was like, yeah, right. But it was fun, and we got along well. We had similar senses of humor about things, and he made snarky comments at the play, and I made snarky comments at the play, because that's what we do.
We made similar snarky comments, which was a good sign.
So after this date, I was like, I would go out with him. And unbeknownst to me, Brandon gave Elantris to our mutual friend and said, give this to Emily and have her read it. And I still have that exact copy. But so I read this book, and like I said, I've been a little skeptical of this guy who talks about his agent and his editor, and I'm like, yeah. So I started reading Elantris, and then I was like, oh. Yeah, he's a real writer.
This was the published version after Moshe and Joshua had fixed it.
Yes.
I'm just amazed you didn't bring it along on the first day.
It'd been a few months, so I had stopped carrying it around on my shoulder. Big arrow.
So I read, and I remember specifically, because by then we'd been on a couple of dates and done some things together, and both of us are fairly reserved people. And especially at that time, we were even more so. We were just kind of like, so I was like, does this guy does he know how to be romantic? You know, does he? So I specifically went through Elantris and made sure that the romance worked out. And then I was like, okay, we can go. But then
We hit it off?
hit it off, and that
The
was...
English teacher and the writer, let me ask, because I want to... Michael's got a different perspective on this, because he wasn't there at the beginning. But I kind of want to ask this idea of, like, how does it work with you as an illustrator? How do you take books and make a cover? Because so many people are interested in where this comes from, and how do you balance that in your life versus your fine art productions and things like that?
I don't. Well, that's why I'm getting so little sleep lately. I just came back from the opening of a show in a museum in LA a couple of days ago, so I'm still feeling kind of jet lagged from that. But trying to juggle both is really difficult, and my heart is really set on trying to get more of my gallery work done, so it has to be a project that really interests me and grabs my attention to draw me in, and the Way of Kings did that. You know, Brandon has such a visual sense of what his worlds look like and his environments and everything. The whole time I'm reading it, I'm seeing it like a movie spooling in my head. So when it comes to trying to come up with one image for a 1,400-page book, it's really tough. I mean, there's so many potential, and especially with the first book of a new series, you don't know who's going to survive and who isn't. And you don't want to put someone on the cover who's going to be killed off chapter 1 of the second book in the series or something. So so there's a lot of guesswork involved, but. What I've really enjoyed is being able to talk to Brandon and his team and have a back and forth conversation going on about what works and what doesn't for it. And that is really a wonderful experience. It's pretty rare in our field that usually publishers, during the first 30 years of my career anyway, went to great lengths actually to keep the artists away from the authors, and to keep the authors away from trying to influence the authors' directions on the book covers. And I would go to conventions to kind of work around that and get to talk to Stephen Donaldson or whoever in a hotel room and share some of that. But that doesn't happen with Tor. You know, and Brandon, you were so involved with the artwork with the Roshar, the Stormlight Archives books. You had Ben McSweeney visualizing characters in there. That's an enormous help for me because a lot of the look, which Brandon has seen and has approved, is already established for me. So there's a lot less groping around in the dark, I guess, to figure out what's relevant for the cover and what isn't. I can't remember what the question was now.
That's a good answer. You know,
I just want to add that I think that this panel is theoretically about how Brandon's career developed, and I have to give a shout out to another artist, although Michael is absolutely my #1 favorite. But the first book had a cover by Stéphane Martinière, which we were incredibly lucky that Irene Gallo, our fantastic art director of Tor, had this brilliant idea to try to find artists from the movie visualization area, people who help develop movies and they work up art, conceptual art for the films. And that's what Stéphane was doing, and she convinced him to try doing some book cover art, and the one that we got for Elantris was the very first one he did for Tor. And I'm sure that the quality of that cover, which is fantastic, had a real impact on the early sales of that book before anybody knew Brandon Sanderson.
it really had that feel of this is a fantasy novel with some science fiction feel to it.
And in fact, Brandon and I were so knocked out by it that we actually agreed that we were going to change something in the book to create a scene that would exactly match the cover. And Irene thought that was hilarious and stupid, but we did it anyway. We did it anyway because, I mean, she's right, really, it's not necessary. But we were just geeking out on the whole thing, you know. I mean, wow, this is such an incredible piece of art. We have to make it a specific illustration on the point. And I mean, it wasn't a big deal to do it, but it just
No,
gave us,
you pitched it to me and I said, yeah, it's a great idea. So we added a little scene.
just a little scene so that there was like this balcony off the wall, you know, and where the two characters can meet. And we got a lot of pleasure out of that. I don't know if Stefan thought of that. He must have if he ever found out about it. But, you know, and then now we have these fantastic covers. I mean, I never imagined as an editor that I was ever going to have a Michael Whalen cover on a book, because I knew that Michael had basically stopped doing covers. So I was really as excited as Brandon was when I heard that.
So I gotta tell the story. Go ahead, but I got a story I gotta tell. So.
And just, you know, covers, I generally think every cover needs to be redesigned every 10 or 12 years because they sit on the shelves that long and they're yesterday's cover. And if you look at big authors like Stephen Grisham or whatever, they get new looks constantly. But you look at something like the Elantris cover that is now over a decade old, and it's like the cover for the Mists of Avalon.
Yeah.
And
You
same
just don't
thing
change
with
it.
the cover for the Way of Kings. You look at those, and you can't ever see wanting to change them. And that does not happen very often.
The cover for Elantris literally stopped me in my tracks at the Barnes & Noble when I saw it. And what struck me about it was that the way it pulled you and invited you into this world. You know, so many covers seem to be portraits or about a particular person, and the background gets blurred out. Stefan's cover made you want to step in, meet that person in the foreground, and go on into and get lost in that world. And boom, you know, it's something that works that well and fits a novel like that. I think it's going to stand the test of time.
So lucky because now it's hard to get a Stefan cover, right? But if I can embarrass Michael for a moment, he's heard this story before. But so those who don't know my story, if we back up a little bit, I mentioned on the panel the other day that I was not a reader when I was young. I was one of these young boys they call reluctant readers. I didn't like books, people kept giving me books, and I just didn't enjoy any of them until I had a teacher in 8th grade who made me read a book. She's like, you are doing your book reports by just reading the backs of the books and guessing. And I was really good at guessing, so it was hard to figure out, but I was just guessing, because we didn't have the internet to look up what the book was about. I just read the back, read a few pages, and write a book report on it. And she said, I need you to read a book that I have read recently. That's one of my books, so I can be sure that you are reading the book. And she took me to the back of her room, and all the way I'm protesting that I just don't like books, I'm not going to find a book, and she said, pick one of these, and she had on her rack a set of, old paperbacks that had been stained with spaghetti stains from school lunch. 100 kids have read them, and I leafed through those, and the one that stopped me was Dragon's Bait by Barbara Hamley. And it was the cover. And people always say you can't judge a book by its cover. I think that is total bunk, because I got that book and I read that book and I loved it, and I said to my teacher, like, are there more like this? And she's like, let me introduce you to this place called the library. And so I went in, and the next book I found was Dragonflight by Anne McCaffrey, which had a similar feel, and I read that whole series. And then I went looking for something similar to that, and I came upon the very next book I read was Dragon Prince by Melanie Ron, which, if you know anything of your Michael Whalen history, are 3 classic Michael Whalen covers. And that said fantasy to me. And I started hunting for books that had Michael Whalen covers to read. It introduced me to all kinds of different authors. C.S. Friedman I read because of the covers, because I'm like, well, if they're going to put a Michael Whalen cover on it, it means that they are I actually read Asimov when they re-released with Whalen covers. That's when I read, I'm like, oh, Foundation, when Foundation was re-released with Whalen covers, I'm like, oh, I need to read these now. And that introduced, like, I read classic science fiction once it deserved a Whalen cover. And so for my...
Blushing yet?
For my birthday, when I was 17 or 18, I asked for the Art of Michael Whalen. The big, nice book book that he did with a lot of his art. They had an interview with Anne McCaffrey, interviewing him in it. And I would sit each night before I went to bed as a writing exercise, and I would take a look at one of the pieces that didn't have a book associated with it, because it was half fine art, his gallery pieces. And well, it's all fine art, but gallery pieces rather than book covers, rather than illustrations. I would look at these and I'd say, all right, what's the story of this one? What's the story of this one? And one of the themes for that book was the Passage series of paintings, which were these candles, these glowing candle globes that would pass in and out, that kind of were like the transition between life and death. If that's correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct, yeah.
And I would imagine stories to go with these. And the Seums from Elantris came from these spheres in Michael Whalen paintings, specifically one that is, the woman is standing before an arch. I think it's actually just called The Verge, right?
Oh, Verge.
Yeah, Verge. And she's got one of these globes in front of her hand. It's like she's standing before the gateway between life and death. And I'm like, I imagined a story to go with that. And for Christmas this year, Michael actually sent me a framed copy of that, of the painting. Which I now have hanging above my desk, which is very special to me. We have the original for Way of Kings, by the way, and that's like hanging in the office grand entry room for everyone to come in and see. But right above my desk is Verge, because that was the first story I can remember imagining. I knew I did a bunch of them. Out of that, that's the one that stuck with me, and I eventually wrote Elantris because of that inspiration.
I've never been more flattered. Thank you.
So I don't know how it is, but a lot of what Michael does is someone gives him a book and inspires a piece of art.
Yeah.
My career was partially due to Michael creating art and inspiring it back the other direction.
Yeah, it's fun, and it bounces back and forth that way now. So now I'll get a manuscript. Usually, because of owing to my schedule, I need to get the work done well before the final version of the book is finished. So I'm reading first drafts and sections of chapters. But Brandon knows what I'm drawn to, and he has an idea of what he would like to see on the cover, and it complements very well my feeling about what I'd like to see on the cover. But for the first book, I felt the character that needed to be shown on the cover was the storms, the environment of Rochard. It had a very Dune-like feeling to me, the way, and that's one way in which I saw it as a semi-science fiction book, because you'd so carefully thought out the look and feel of all the flora and fauna of this world. And I love the splendid, wondrous quality of these gigantic storms and the power that they unleash. So I figured, the storm had to be the main character on the cover, and I've never really worked in pastels as a medium before, but once I had a general idea of that, I put a panel on a easel and took pastels, and because it would create soft edges, and just to get the sweep of the storm. And once that was there, I was off and running on it. But it all comes from my enthusiasm, what I was seeing and experiencing, reading what part of the story was given to me. For that book, I think the whole book was available.
Yes, you read the whole book on that one. The second one you read an early draft, and the third one we sent you the ending.
Yeah.
No, I was wondering what he had.
Yeah, he got the ending, but we sent him the whole book, but Michael's so busy, we just send him the final version to read whenever he wants to, but the painting has to be done earlier, usually. We do a really weird thing. The Stormlight books in particular are big enough that we have to have different parts of the quote-unquote machine working on them at different times. Yeah. So while I'm doing a revision, the beta readers are reading the latest revision of the previous parts. They actually have those now. Moshe is just finishing his revision on the parts beyond where I am, and I'm revising the center, and then we just all kind of leapfrog one. And so, yeah.
Well, not being an editor, I got the first 300 pages from Isaac, and I was reading it, and Irene, I think, or someone had written me an email saying, well, it's still undergoing revision. And I remember putting it down and looking at the author and said, revised what? What's going on? I mean, it just, it moved along. The characters are fascinating. The the magic system is just utterly compelling. I didn't see any room for improvement, so I'll be very interested in reading the final version. But I had no idea until you mentioned it right now that the scene I'm doing has anything to do with at the end of the book.
Yeah.
You know, it could have been any other book, but oh man, what a scene! You guys are That's one of the advantages of doing what I'm doing, by the way, is I get to read it before everybody else.
I had no idea about this, and now I'm like really curious. I mean, I can think of a few possibilities, but I mean, it is true that because of the size of these books, we really have invented a whole new kind of editorial process, and it's a challenge to me because I don't really get a feel for the shape of the whole thing, you know, until I've gone through it once in chunks, and then when I do the second edit, then I'm in a different place. But initially, I'm usually working on pieces of about 100 to 150 pages.
Right. It's like, where is this going? Yeah.
And not only that, he gets these stuff out of order too, because he writes these interludes, which maybe appear somewhere else in the story. Mostly they're pretty self-contained, so those are actually the easiest bits, I guess, in some ways. But and all I can say is, thank God for digital technology. If we were doing this on paper, let alone, my God, using typewriters, it would just be impossible.
There's one time where Robert Jordan was in a hotel in New York. Thomas told me this story, where to get a book out on time, he would type on a typewriter a page, hand it to Harriet, who would edit it, his editor and wife. She would then hand it back to him to put her revisions in. He would do that page and then hand it to a group of people from tour who proofread it in a row of like 5 people and then handed it back to him, and he would type it one more time, and then they would put it in the stack to send to the copy editors. We don't have to do that anymore. Let's go ahead and do a few questions.
We literally edit these books on an iPad, okay? And I'm really grateful for that because the first one we did electronically, which was Way of Kings, they didn't have it yet for track changes for iPad yet. And I had to do it on my Mac, in Word. And my back was killing me. I was getting damage to my hands.
Because you had to work at a desk for once? Yeah.
And at one point I bought it like an artist tablet so that I could edit with a stylus instead, because I needed to use different muscles. My hand was so sore. And now I can lie in bed, I can sit back in a comfy chair, and everything is on here. You could always edit on the subway with a stack of pages, but if you finished where it was that you'd taken with you, you were out of luck. I've got the whole book in here now, or at least I've loved as he sent me, and I don't have to worry about that. It's fabulous. And the other great thing is that, if I make a change and they like it, they don't have to type it. They just go click, accept. And I've done the typing, they haven't done it.
That actually makes it so that I argue with Moshe a lot less on things he changes, because it's so easy to say, okay. I've told him before, it gets more of his line edits in particular just get put in because he'll suggest the change, and I'm like, that's good, and then just say yes. But we should do a few questions. I want to tell you, I do have a Q&A.
Just one quick thing.
Okay.
I know you're all dying to see what's going to happen in Oathbringer, so this is a preview. Right?
Yeah. You clicked off of it.
Oh, sorry. It's an actual page. This is chapter Shalom 3-3, and she's in the capital of.
Oh, hey, that's too big a spoiler.
Yeah, but it looks like Moshe is suggesting that be cut out.
The red parts of the line edit.
Deleted scene.
Yeah. So, I do have a Q&A and a reading tomorrow. So we will have another chance at this, but if you have any questions that the panel can answer, why don't you guys go ahead and ask them? Go ahead. You just go ask it and I'll repeat it.
Well, first, Mr. Fader, I fear for the safety of your iPad. But for the whole panel, my question is going back to book covers. What does the back and forth look like? Not just for the Stormlight Archive, but generally between an editorial preferences, what you see in your head as an author, and what you see as an artist, and what happens.
Okay, what's the back and forth for how a book cover gets made?
Well, the first thing you have to understand is that most authors have no say whatsoever. Okay? I mean, it sounds like a joke, but it's true. They don't have any say whatsoever. Secondly, the editor only gets to like make suggestions. I don't have any control whatsoever. Okay? It's completely controlled by the art director, of course, and working with the artist. And then it's a matter of satisfying Tom and satisfying the salespeople. They're the one. If sales said, well, that cover will never work, then it doesn't matter how much I like it, how much the author likes it. It ain't happening.
I have to say that there's a fine art to the pairing of artist to author, which a sensitive art director who's really at the top of the field, like Irene Gallo, has an amazing ability to pick just the right talent. And not only that, I've been really excited by how Brandon's books have been reinterpreted by other artists, like the Mistborn book, which I generously received as a Christmas gift at the end of the year. It's got a Chinese cover on it. It's got a Young A cover by Sam Weber that's knocked down gorgeous, incredible cover. I mean, when I looked at it, I was just drooling with envy. But there's even fan art, including some top quality fan art. These people are doing work that's on a professional level that I don't know whether you found it on conceptart.org.
Yeah, we watch the fan artists. In fact, I have Ben McSweeney, who I hired to do the concept art for Way of Kings, and then he now does Shalon sketchbook pages. I hired because he'd done fan art on DeviantArt, that he was a professional illustrator. He just did some, and I like this. Can you do some work for me? And we've gotten a lot of people that way. And so Mike was talking about the leather-bound 10th anniversary, and it has like 25 colored pages in it.
The color stuff from the foreign editions and the fan art Mike was talking about, they're amazing. I mean, if they had given me as, which one of these would you like to use for the cover of your edition, I would have been tearing my hair out. That's what's left. It's just, they're just so good, and each one has a slightly different take on it. And like, I want to take like this one's version of what the character looks like, and this one's version of what the background looks like. There's so much cool stuff there.
I wouldn't have been able to choose.
Yeah, it's remarkable.
Do we end at like 10 till or 5 till, or when are we supposed to end?
Oh, just
We'll go in just a couple minutes. Let me answer this one myself, though. It's really interesting because I learned quickly that the author doesn't have a lot to say. The reason for this being that authors look at book covers differently than marketing team does. They want it to be an advertisement for the book that engages the right audience. And they don't care about any specifics. If it gets the right audience, it is the right cover. Now, I want to work with certain illustrators. You can tell from the fact that the Stormlight has all these interior illustrations and stuff that the art of a book is very important to me. So I learned quickly to follow Irene Gallo's blog, to find the illustrators she liked working with, to see the ones that I thought would be a good match for me. And when, once in a while, the editor comes to you and says, hey, do you have any suggestions for where they can look to do a cover? I would have ready a pitch for a cover illustrator that was several pages long, that included quotes from the book, talking about what would make a good cover in my opinion, like trying to make Irene's job easier. And at the end, I would pick one of the illustrators that she liked working with and say, I think this person is a good match for my book. And so Moshe would take those and say, great, and give them to Irene. She's like, great, an author who gets it, and then I got those illustrators every time. So that's how I ended up with the gorgeous quote cover for Warbreakers. I really like Dan Dos Santos' work. I think he is really doing some amazing things that look distinct, even different. And I gave this big pitch to Moshe that he gave to Irene that she just said, well, it looks like he's thought this through. Dan, do you want to do this? He's like, yeah. And so we're learning to make people's jobs easier instead of harder. It's a good way to approach this. Let's do one last question, and let's go right over here.
Hi there. Thank you so much for sharing all of your stories and experience. I just wanted to ask, do you have any advice for hopeful authors in the process of
Ooh, yeah.
like specifically on resources or opportunities to obtain feedback to improve them so they're less terrible?
Okay, yeah. So advice for aspiring professional writers, particularly resources to help them improve. And Moshe and Joshua.
Okay, well, I'll tell you that when I was still thinking about trying to be a writer, I spent a number of years in a writer's group that a bunch of my friends and I put together, and where we all read each other's stuff and commented on it to each other. It's impossible for somebody to be the best judge of their own work. You can simulate it a little bit by putting stuff aside for a few days or a week and then coming back to it a little fresher. But ultimately, you've got to have an external source of opinion, and you need people that you know that you can trust and who have the same similar background and are capable of judging what you're trying to do. What I always say about this is trying to edit yourself is like trying to tickle yourself. Okay, so it doesn't work because it's a closed loop. And you've got to have that outside eye. So I would say the first thing is to try to put together, either find an existing writing group and join it, or put one together.
And I would say that a con like this can help you find those people. I found the people from my writing group at the class I took and at my local science fiction convention. And I just listened for people who asked really smart questions, or who went to workshop sessions or things like that. And then I would ask them, hey, are you interested in being in a writing group? And I would form writing groups out of that. And for me, face-to-face for a writing group is really important. I will give the warning, Professor Sanderson warning, putting on this other hat. There is a subsection of people for whom a writing group ruins their books. This is generally people who like to discovery write their way into their story. If you give chapters to someone when you're that type of writer and they say, ooh, what if you did this? It can derail your story completely. If that's the case, you could still try a writing group, but make sure your book is finished or your story is finished before you write a group. But if you're the type that is too likely to take too many people's suggestions, it can really destroy your book. I have found them vital to me. Joshua, what would you recommend, new writers?
Being quick, I would say read a lot. Because you can't write a good book if you don't read a lot. And the second part of that is, don't just ask, what does this writer do? Ask, what do I like about what this writer is doing? Because it's very easy to borrow the wrong things, and that is not going to help.
Right, and if we set something on that, if I mention something with that, try to read books by new authors that have been acquired recently by editors and agents to see what they are really excited about publishing, right? If I publish something, well, there isn't probably a publisher in the business who wouldn't take one of my books right now. And so that doesn't tell you as much as this new author, someone got really excited by and got the marketing team and the publisher and everyone on board for that. What did this new author do? Plus it helps the community a lot when new author books are being talked about. So, we are out of time. Feel free to come to my signing or my Q&A, and my reading tomorrow will be from Oathbringer. And Michael has prints down for sale that you can pick up, that he would sign for you, and I will sign if they're of mine. I also have a convention-exclusive book for sale downstairs in the dealer's room at the Northeastern Science Fiction table. I think they have a few copies left, so there you go. Thanks, guys.
That's okay. I got a couple of my preliminary sketches for Oathbringer.
Well, a song about never saying never and never being told what you can or cannot do. This is one of us. A 1, 2, 3. Fighting, or when fighting got to me, I looked to find examples on the field of chivalry, and I saw mighty arms, much stronger than my arms could ever be. So I thought perhaps that field was not for me. But still I stayed and watched the fighting till one figure stood apart, in armor newly fashioned and a helm more pot than art. But each blow was thrown with honor and the lightness of the heart. So I took that step which soon became a start. 'Cause she was not the biggest fighter, nor one to raise a fuss, but I remember being proud that she was one of us. And we might never stand together in a shield wall side by side. Because of her I lift my sword with pride. and lively, not the type you would expect. With a braver heart than many and a slot shot to respect. And I guess she'd once decided this was where she'd like to be. And I thought if she could do it, why not me? 'Cause she was not the biggest fighter, nor one to raise a fuss. And I remember being proud that she